Hello everybody, we are going to be learning about perfect competition today. So it's the first of the 4 market structures that we are studying, and it's the most simple, although it may not feel like it. And we start with some assumptions that help make the model usable for us to play with and then make some predictions with. So what are the characteristics, the attributes of a perfectly competitive market? First, that firms in that market are price takers. So what that means is because there are many buyers and sellers, and because they all sell a homogeneous or standardized product, no one firm has any control over price, and so whatever price is set in the market, that firm has to charge for its product. If it tries to charge more, no one will buy its good. So it's reactive. Also, there are no barriers to entry or exit. So if there's profits, other firms can enter and be a part of this industry. If there are losses, firms can leave in the long run. And what that's going to lead us to is zero or no long-run economic profits. And these are unique attributes for perfect competition. What we want to do now is take a good look at what the graphs look like. So some of this will feel familiar. Take a look at this market demand or industry curve. That's our supply and demand curve that we've already studied. But now you'll notice we have another axis here that's got the firm's demand curve. So what's happening, where demand and supply intersect is the equilibrium, it sets the price, 200, and that price is the price that's taken by the firm. And that is the price that the firm will charge for its product. So whether it supplies Q1, this little amount, or Q2, no matter what, the firm will supply it at a price of $200. It receives that. So that is the firm's demand curve. They decide what they want to produce, and that's what they get for their good. It's also equal to the marginal revenue curve. Marginal revenue, remember, is additional revenue for each additional unit produced. So any extra unit produced here, they get another $200. That's their marginal revenue curve. And it's 200 because that was what was set in the market. Okay, now what we can do is use those cost curves from Chapter 7 and put them on the firm's demand curve to figure out what's the appropriate quantity to produce and how to maximize profits. So let's first, before we do that, remember what short run and long run costs and factors are. In the short run, there's at least one factor of production that's fixed. So we talked about that. It could be 6 months to a year in general, depends on the industry. What could be fixed? Maybe the firm, the supplier entered into a lease with, the landlord and has a set amount they have to pay for a year. Or maybe they have a contract with their workers and they pay a set amount for the first year. Those things that are fixed means that in the short run, when they take that price as given, there's only going to be a certain amount of profits or losses that they're able to do. They don't have a lot of flexibility. So in the short run, these perfectly competitive firms may have profits or losses. If they have losses, you can't force them to make a loss, so they can decide, hey, do I even want to continue producing to try to minimize my loss, or maybe I should just shut down. In the long run, we talked about this, all costs are variable. They don't have to stick around and do the lease agreement or the contract with their workers. Maybe they want to move to Vietnam, or maybe they want to create a new factory, in Alabama. So all factors are variable. The firms can enter if they want to be somewhere where there are profits, or exit if there are losses, and that'll drive economic profits in the long run to zero. And we'll take a look at that. That's called normal profits. So how do we figure out profits and losses? There are 5 steps. These are good to feel familiar with. The first is find where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Well, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, same thing. The idea is if these two things are not equal, then the firm can do better. Marginal revenue, additional revenue for additional unit produced. Marginal cost, additional cost for the additional unit produced. If one is greater than the other, let's say marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, firms making more every time they increase their output in terms of additional revenue, then produce more. And vice versa. If costs are too high, marginal cost being greater than marginal revenue, reduce your quantity. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that this marginal revenue equals marginal cost tells us number 2, the optimal quantity or output to produce. So if you look at our graph, what we've done is we've taken that flat demand curve, and that flat demand curve is a perfectly elastic demand curve. We've studied that. It's also equal to marginal revenue. Remember, that came from the other axes where supply and demand intersected. Once we see where marginal cost, remember these cost curves from Chapter 7, it's a J-shaped cost, where it intersects marginal revenue, that's step 1. Go down to the quantity axis, the output axis for step 2, and that's this firm's optimal quantity to produce given the price that it's taking from the market and its cost structure. Once we know this optimal quantity, that is going to help us figure out if there's profits or losses. So how do we do that? You go up from the quantity to what the price is at that quantity, and it will be the same across all the quantities as we've seen as a price-taking firm. So in this case, there's 3, it's 60. And then at this quantity again, go ahead and take a look at what the cost is per unit, and we can find that from the average total cost curve. So the difference between the price in step 3 and the average total cost in step 4, that's the profit margin. And we can find the profit, step 5, by multiplying the difference between price and average total cost by the quantity. So profits is this blue box here. It's a rectangle, height times the length. The height is the difference between price and average total cost, and the length is the quantity produced. Okay, so that's for profits. What about for losses? Let's take a look at that. Everything looks similar except take a look and notice where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, step 1, down to the quantity, step 2. When you go up to compare the price, 70 here, it's less than average total cost, which is 80. So if every time this firm is producing, they're only getting 70, but it costs them 80, there's going to be losses. So that would be negative profits or losses. Here's the formula, price minus average total cost times quantity, and we get that their losses are 350. So now the firm has to decide, am I going to shut down or keep producing to try to minimize loss? And what we need to know in order to make that decision is what their average variable cost is at that quantity. So we need one more point to take a look at. Take a look here at average variable cost. Do you see where it intersects the output that they're producing? It's actually less. That's a good thing for this firm. They're getting a price, $70, that's covering what their variable costs are. So for them, what that means is it makes sense to keep producing. That'll help them minimize their losses. If average variable costs were greater at that quantity, that optimal quantity, then that means they're spending more, they're paying their workers more every time they're producing, they should just shut down. So we call this the shutdown point. It's where average variable cost intersects the output. Okay, so we've talked about perfect competition, the attributes, what it looks like in the short run. Let's now move to long run. And something really cool about long run is perfect competition in the long run is efficient. It meets our criteria for 2 types of efficiency. It's allocatively efficient, remember that? I think that was chapter 1. There's a mix of goods and services that our society wants. It's the correct quantity. It's also productively efficient. These firms are going to be supplying their goods and services at their lowest possible cost. No one told them they had to do that. They did it on the natural through being attracted when there's profits and leaving when there's losses. The market was efficient, allocatively and productively. Let's take a look at that with the graphs. Okay, so what is that going to mean? That means that there's an adjustment process to equilibrium. So in the short run, if we took a look at a firm that had profits, remember this graph? Now what we're saying is let's go back and look at the industry and the market and see how profits affect what's going on in the market. Profits are actually a signal. They're telling firms, hey, this is the place to be. This is a good industry. You want to be here. You'll make money. Consumers want this product. They're paying for it. And so that means there will be more suppliers. The supply curve shifts from a supply of 0, the original S0, to S1. Remember that rightward shift of the supply curve is an increase in supply. You can see that because the quantity in the market's going up. That's what we want. That's productively efficient, and allocatively efficient. We are having more being produced. People are wanting these goods. They're buying them. But what happens, and not that this is bad or good, is that the price is going to come down as a result. There's a new equilibrium of the supply one and demand one, and that corresponds to a new price. I didn't draw it in here. Actually, I need to go back and do that. You can see that I was going to do it. There would be a line right here. That would be the new price that the firm takes, and it's going to be at 15, and that'll mean that at that price, the marginal cost will equal the marginal revenue at this quantity 1, and that means that there will be 0 economic profits. The profits attracted firms, firms entered until price came down enough to make it so there were no longer profits and no more firms were attracted to enter. It can happen the other way too if there are losses. If there are losses, you could take a look. Remember this, average total cost is greater than the price at the original quantity. Here at the original quantity. And so what does that mean? When there are losses in the long run because there are variable costs, these firms decide to go somewhere else. They're going to produce somewhere else. They don't want to do it anymore. That is a leftward shift in the market supply curve. There will be less being produced. That's what we wanted. Losses are a signal that society doesn't value those goods as much. That results in price going up a bit. And so you will move to this 25 price. And there again, I lost that line. Sorry about that. To a demand curve 1 and a marginal revenue curve 1. That's the new price that's being taken, and it'll create zero economic profit. Okay, that's the adjustment. Now here's what it looks like. Ta-da! Kind of like a cooking show where I show you how to bake a cake, put it in the oven, and then pull out one that's already done. Here's one that's already gone through the adjustment process. And we end up at a long-run competitive equilibrium that is productively efficient because look at this, we are producing at the bottom of the long-run average total cost curve and the short-run average total cost curve right there. And it is allocatively efficient because we've got supply and demand intersecting, and that's the quantity that's being produced. Remember from looking at total surplus analysis, consumer surplus, and producer surplus, that when we allow the market to set the quantity and the price, that's when we maximize total surplus. So that is our efficient outcome, and that is perfect competition. All right, good luck going on to the next step.